Jumpin' In on Manx Radio.
With Howard and Chris Kane.
Hello.
Good evening.
And welcome. And here we are indeed, jumping into a new year. Can you believe it? 2021 already. And this evening we are going to be having part 2 of the best of 2020. A strange old year for some, but a good year for jazz, it seems. I'm H.
And I'm Chris. Yes, it's all uphill now, I'm afraid, but it can't be much worse than last year, can it? On the plus side, there are 357 shopping days at your disposal before the big man in red next heads towards your chimney. So welcome along to part 2 of our review of our choice of jazz albums of the year 2020, which, as H said, despite the circumstances, turned out to be a bit of a bumpy year. So what's first footed its way into your selection this week, H?
You know, I'm spoilt for choice. There were so many when I started looking for it. I do think I have to go back to earlier in the year with Valeria Payola, The Dead Don't Dream. I remember listening at the time thinking this will make my list, surely. Henri Texier, 80, still going strong, and Lord knows where we'll go after that.
And for me, well, there's a good boy or three. Look at the Big Apple, a Black Hole, and to roll out the new year, a Marble with Limona. That was Limona, taken from Marble, the big band debut from 36-year-old German bassist Hendrike Enzian in what she calls Hendrike Enzian Plus. Hendrike and her ensemble has already 2 quartet releases to her name, and having won the WDR prize for composition for big band, she was spurred on to write further large ensemble pieces, composing several for both the WDR big band and the Metropole Orchestra before enhancing her own quartet, who is still the core of this 17-piece band you just heard. She's been a regular on my playlist, I think, since I picked that one up earlier in the year, and absolutely sure there'll be more to come from this talented player and composer.
Terrific indeed. And from a, what do you say, 30-something-year-old bassist to a bassist who is 80, I think, Henri Texier. Still going strong at 80, still fresh, still that wonderful, woody, warm, buzzing sound he gets from his bass. Has played with, well, you name it, a who's who, Dexter Gordon going back in the day, and pretty much anyone who's anyone on the European scene over the last 50 years. His own bands as well have been fantastic with those influences, particularly of his journeys in Africa and that part of the world. Always a wonderful sound. His current lineup has the likes of Mano Cadilla on guitar, Gauthier Garrigue, Vincent Lecang, and his son Sébastien Texier on saxophone. And here's one from early in the year. I think this came out in sort of February time. The album's called Chance on Label Bleu, and this track is called Cinecita. Like so many Henri Texier albums, a sort of a unique sound on the bass as well he's always got. You'll never go far wrong. We're just looking, Lord knows, he must have 70 or 80 albums out, I'd have thought, under his own name over the years, some of which not that easy to find, although I dare say they're online, somewhere on the lines. Good old-fashioned CD on that one, Chance Henri Texier and Label Bleu, and as I say, with Sébastien Texier, who also records under his own name as well. Well worth checking out.
Indeed, and you won't go far wrong with any Henri Texier album, and indeed you'll find him equally as a sideman on many, many other albums. Now, the trio format has always been very popular, with jazz musicians often allowing space for soloists to stretch his or her musical legs and extend their ideas, and many spring to mind way out west, of course, Sonny Rollins, Ahmad Jamal at the Pershing, Jimmy Jufrey, Bill Evans, Oscar Peterson's Night Train, and many, many others. But what's perhaps more unusual is for all the trio to pretty much have an equal influence and solo space, as in Trio Grande. Let's hear Eli Yeled Tov. 3 musicians, 3 nationalities, 3 instruments and 1 trio grande, released under the name of British saxman Will Vinson, bringing together Matheny's drummer Antonio Sanchez from Mexico and Israeli guitarist Gilad Hexelman into a bassless trio which Vinson says he wanted to try after being inspired by the Paul Motion trio. He'd been asked by his record company to get a trio together, and after a regular spot at Greenwich Village's Cornelia Street Cafe, new one on me, we'll have to try that if we're ever allowed to travel again, 2018's It's All Right With 3 on Crisscross was the result, but the trio has continued to evolve and develop their musical sound and identity, and Trio Grande was born as a title for the band. They're now on the Whirlwind label, and this album's been a favourite of mine since its release, and you can sense the real joy in the playing between all the players there. Incidentally, the title track there, Ele Yeled Tov, means Ellie's a good boy in Hebrew, which was written by Hexelman for his young son.
Indeed, if we can ever travel again. You're listening to Jumpin' In with Chris and myself, H. This is part 2 of our records of the year 2020. A strange year, not a good one for so many people. However, it does appear to have inspired a lot of people, whether it's in lockdown, whether it's because they've just been doing studio work or just composing, I don't know, but an awful lot of good jazz seems to have come out this year, albeit sadly, not many people have been able to see it live. And well done, of course, to LJF for managing to get something on for the London Jazz Festival. We didn't get down for obvious reasons for what little there was, I think, live stuff, most of it online. But fingers crossed, we can back in 2021. Another trio that you might be familiar with is Django Bates has had his beloved trio, or just beloved, he calls it Django, on keyboards, Peter Eld and Peter Brun on bass and drums. Over the last few years, they've got a couple of them out. He's now expanded it for his latest, which has done very well in the British charts. Not maybe listed so much on the other side of the Atlantic, but I think it was in the top 3 of jazz albums of the year for critics of Jazzwise magazine. It's with the Norbotten Big Band, and very effective sound it makes too. Let's hear them tackle Alucha. Aluchar. Charlie Parker, given the old Django Bates treatment. We were just talking as we were listening to that and saying, yes, you could well imagine Loose Tubes playing that, more than a hint of the Loose Tubes vibe about it, that sort of organised chaos sound which Django seems to like. It can be sometimes overly tricksy, but again, if you like the quieter sound of Django, then check out the Beloved Trio, which is much more ECM, as we were saying, in sort of in aesthetic, as it were. Much more space between the notes, nowhere near as much sort of chaos and that sort of tricksy cleverness which he really enjoys within his music. And overall, the tenacity, I must admit, I hummed and hard and I thought, well, let's try it. And I've really enjoyed it overall, and that, yes, it can be a bit loose tubesy if you don't like loose tubesy, but also there's some really lovely bits in it as well, some great orchestration, and yes, worthy of being in the top 10, I think, of the jazz critics in Jazzwise for 2020. Tenacity, Django Bates.
And as you mentioned, the different jazz charts around the world actually reflect very much the local scenes in different places, and one that, whilst that didn't turn up on stateside lists, one that did turn up in a number of them actually was this one, born in 1966, Polish pianist and composer Joachim Menzel. He's worked in jazz and popular music and composed for cinema and theatre as well as leading a wide variety of different ensembles, pop, rock, jazz, etc. He's also worked with a number of greats, Charlie Mariano, Eddie Henderson, Dave Liebman and Nigel Kennedy, to name but a few. But despite a number of international tours, he'd always wanted to put together a stateside quartet to record his music. And with company of guitarist Steve Cordenius, bassist Scott Colley and Rudy Royston on the drums, November's release, Brooklyn Eye, is the result. I'm yo man, you might say. And he did.
Hi, this is Seamus Blake. You're listening to Jumpin' In on Manx Radio.
Terrific stuff. I haven't actually heard that one for a while and forgotten how much I enjoyed it. It came out, I think, at the earlier part of the year towards lockdown. I do remember playing it then thinking, this is terrific. It'll definitely be on my list, and it has stayed there. It is always the nature of things, unless you're super well organised, which I'm not generally, and that you tend to err towards things which should come out at the back end of the year because you've been listening to them more and they're fresher in your mind. And I keep meaning to make a note or be organised like you and put them all or burn them all on, or however you make your notes as you go along. But it's worth digging that one out again as well. Suspended, the last track on Veneri Puyola. I think it's Puyola. The Dead Don't Dream, which came out. Was that on Act or Women? I can't remember now.
No, on Edition.
On Edition
yeah.
It was. That's right, Edition, I should say. Dave Stapleton and the boys. Terrific album, that. And yeah, well worth checking out, even though it is a little bit early in the year. And of course, comes from a great family. His father was, I'm trying to think of his name now, but he was a well-known classical player, I think, wasn't he? Veneri's father was a classical composer, if memory serves correct. Finish.
Pekka Pohjola. No, he was a more rocky guitarist.
That's
with
right.
a trend towards
He did do some
jazzy
classical
ends
stuff
of
as well,
things, some
though,
jazzy
yeah.
stuff. But
Anyway,
interesting.
Comes from a
interesting
good musical
stuff.
family.
Yeah, and well, great again. His albums have all been really good and slightly differing styles every time, and really interesting. And before that, Joachim Menzel with "I'm Your Man," taken from his new release Brooklyn Eye, making it onto a number of stateside lists for albums of the year. It's a thoroughly entertaining album with great ensemble playing. Steve Cordenius on guitar, perhaps best known for his work with Paul Motion's Electric Bebop Band, or indeed Charlie Hayden's Liberation Music Orchestra, and he's got a new one out in his own name. We might dip into that sometime. Scott Colley on bass and Rudy Royston on the drums. Definitely worth a place in your collection, not least because I think it's the only album in my collection where he features quite a few tracks on his other main instrument, as he's a jazz hurdy-gurdy player.
Fantastic. You know what? We're going to squeeze one more in if we can. I'd love to have played Charles Lloyd 8, Kindred Spirits live from the Libero. Wonderful, well worth checking that one as well. And you get a multiple big deluxe set. Walter Smith III with his In Common band, marvellous as well. I had to go for this one only because it reminds us of live music. We were here in the audience for this album. Jeff Williams live at London Jazz Festival. Cracking stuff it was too. Here's a track he calls Scrunge.
Woohoo!
And it goes straight into the next track there, as you can probably gather from that sudden cut-off, live at the Pizza Express 2019? 18? 19, yeah, it was. I think we were there in the audience. They might have recorded it over a couple of nights, but we were certainly there for one of them. And as Chris was saying, the BBC recording boys were there. So who knows? I must go back and have another listen again. But cracking album, that one indeed. Road Tales, reminiscent of live jazz, and Jeff Williams leading from the drums, and Josh Ocolio taking the sax duties there. A fine band, and Jeff Williams again been on the scene for a long time now, playing, well, obviously leading from the drums, and has played with all sorts, I think, played with Metheny and whatever back in the day.
And Josh Ocolio, a number of great recordings under his own name as well, and he's another man who's promised us a word when the opportunity arises.
Anything else didn't make the list for you then? We didn't manage to squeeze in?
No, I mean, there's too many, to be honest. There were about a dozen that didn't make the list for me, all of which were good. And as I say, the timing is everything. Some of the early ones you may have forgotten by the time you get to the end of the year. Some of the late ones are too late to make the lists, and they don't even make it into the reviewers in time for Christmas. But 'tis the way of the world, and maybe they'll slip into next year's lists. And hopefully we'll be slipping into a Pizza Express if they're still going, and that's one
We
of
live in
our
hope.
favourite jazz clubs. That's about it for this week's Jumpin' In. We hope you enjoyed some of our choices. Don't worry, as 2021's already shaping up with plenty of new releases waiting in the wings, and hopefully it'll be the year when we return to gigs and festivals. We'll leave you with an unusual album I featured on our bass special, Small Moments, from bassist Michael Mannering, which sees him defying all genres with an extraordinary range of colours and styles from his solo bass album, all played live to master tape with no overdubbing. An apt title to end with, Night is Darkness.
Here's to 2021.
Take care.